I am Jim Collison, and this is the Clifton Strengths Podcast Season 2, recorded on March 28th, 2022. In this Clifton Strengths Podcast series, we'll look at the Clifton Strengths for Leaders report one theme at a time, and today's theme is Includer. If you're listening live and you don't see the chat room, there's a link to it right above me there. If you're listening after the fact and you have questions, you can always send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Dr. Jaclynn Robinson is our host today. She works as a senior learning and development consultant. Join me for season 1 of the Clifton Strengths podcast, where we looked at the book Well-Being at Work, one theme at a time. And Jaclynn, always great to be with you. Welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
We are spending some time looking at Includer today, and this should be kind of fun for the both of us. I think we have some areas to grow in this as well. But let's get started with this. What do we mean when we talk about Includer?
So this individual accepts others. You show awareness of those who feel left out and make an effort to include them.
Do you think, unscripted question here, do you think social media has made it easier or harder for us to practice inclusion? You know, because now we have
Ooh,
ways
yes.
of communicating like we've never had before. Has this, and let's not call it social media. Let's just say increased communication channels. Better, worse? Any thoughts on that as we think about
Oh, that's a
including
good
people
one.
in things?
Yeah. I feel like people feel less included
Yeah.
because there's that sense of the fear of missing out. They get to see someone else's life and it's like, oh, I wish I could be doing that. Or, well, and we keep hearing spikes of depression and anxiety
Yeah.
because of social media, because you're less genuinely connected to maybe that community of folks that are around you because you're spending more time on a phone than in person
Yeah.
with people having genuine conversations. I feel like it's almost more exclusive
I
than
think
inclusive.
the challenge for Includer, big capital I on this, like those that have Includer, because we hear that we've never been more connected, I think,
Hmm.
than ever
For
in
sure.
human history. With the technology being able, and yet what we're hearing is we've never been farther apart in actually relating or spending time with each other or having those meaningful connections.
Yes.
And I think
More
this is,
connected, but more disconnected
yeah,
from
yeah,
a
yeah.
relational standpoint.
I think this is the challenge for Includers. Like, I think this is one of those, the culture has changed. How,
Yes.
how are we going to do this differently in a way that, and I think we've been just following a default, like, oh yeah, all social is good, or all time on your phone is good, or all right, whatever. Fill in the blank for whatever works for you on that. But I
Hmm.
think as Includers, we've got a huge task at hand. How do we maybe bring the culture back together, or how do we do a better job of this with the new tools that we do have? I think
Yes.
that's probably
Yes.
right. Every time there's a new
Yes.
technology, it gets abused and it doesn't work very well, and it takes a while for the culture to kind of figure it out. I wonder if we're in that phase. I wonder if we're
That's
in that
true.
phase right
It
now.
it really is this focus on more intention. How do we
Yeah.
build an intentional community
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
the
How do
social
how do
networks?
we stop just letting default always be where things end up, but be intentional, like you just said? Okay, we're spending
Yes.
some time this season thinking about this through the eyes of leaders. We have this new Clifton Strengths for Leaders report, and so let me ask you this question: what do you think the power of this theme is in a leadership role?
They can create a culture of acceptance and collaboration by ensuring everyone and every group has a voice in the conversation. As a result, I think it brings this sense of belongingness, inclusion, and a diversity of thoughts and perspective that's visible, and it's a part of the culture. I
Yeah.
love seeing when leaders have this because you just see that sense of inclusion and collaboration
Mhm.
within their
It's
workforce.
and it builds engagement, right? I mean, when we
Hmm.
think about what teams have to do, whether that's formal engagement in a workplace or engagement in volunteer activities outside of it, or just informal groups that get together, right? Of hearing those voices saying things and then bringing that together, kind of in a way where everyone, and it we just got done spending some time on individualization. I would say it's really hard to do for leaders. includer is, I think, equally as hard for leaders. Interesting that these two are together.
Hmm.
I'm here as we're recording. You're probably listening to it out of order, but equally as hard, right? Don't you think?
Yes.
So, Jaclyn, how as we think about this, then in the context of what we've talked about, how can this theme lead others?
Well, when it comes to decision making or actions that impact the greater sum, this leader can include key stakeholders, if I can speak today, that represent the respective departments or teams, just to ensure that idea sharing, feedback, or actions are really heard and aligned.
Mhm.
So I love the sense of collaboration that they can bring.
There's almost as I hear you talk about that, I think of this idea of kind of rings of including, like, okay, we have a team doing something. That
Hmm.
team is affecting things around it. So how do we widen that communication so that those folks know? And then how do we widen that again? And how many steps out you go, just, I guess, depends on the situation,
Yes.
right? But that's what kind of makes me think, as leaders leading with includer, not just that your team knows, but the team that is affected by your team then is affected by, and so on and so on, right? And so on. Um,
Yes. You hear a lot of cross departmental, say that fast. Oh my gosh. Cross departmental communication
yeah,
happening with what you just mentioned with those rings. So
yeah.
I think that is good because that's a missing element in a lot of workplaces. You see that miscommunication breakdown
Oh, for
where
sure, for
there's
sure.
just an assumption made and they're not going to ask or bring those representative members over
Yeah.
to just talk it out.
It's an area I fail in often. Like this is, as we think about how this theme can hinder leadership of others, I don't have this necessary cheers. I don't have this necessarily high. But as we think about it, how can this theme hinder the leadership of others?
Finding consensus in all decision making might not be the most effective way of managing actions or conversations, or even other people's time at times. So over time, I think that can slow down the organization's pipeline as people find themselves, stuck in meetings or conversations that can generally be tackled with just a few folks in the room who have knowledge and the wherewithal to make that informed decision
Mhm,
and quickly.
mhm.
So it's not something that gets dragged out. So we don't want to have death by meeting, as they say. It's, do I really need everybody here?
Yeah,
Or can I
yeah.
bring the select few in?
Does does this also, like, we think about the success factor of this theme of including, but is it knowing who to exclude that is also a part of this talent? Because, like you said, I mean, I can't hold meetings with the whole company all the time to make
Hmm.
sure they're always included in all the things that I'm doing. That's just not practical. So, is
Yes.
excluding part of the talent? I'm kind of making this up, but it just, as you were talking about it, I thought knowing who to exclude as important as knowing who to include.
It is. It's so important, but I think that's the crux of includer that probably just hurt their heart for everybody that has that in their top 10 to go, I
Yeah.
cannot exclude.
Yeah.
This might be a case where you really are leaning into a different talent to recognize that not everyone can be in the room.
Yeah.
And you won't always have consensus. It's just, am I explaining the why so that people at least recognize why I'm going against what they might seek
Mhm.
or why I can't include them.
I
So
think of that sculptor
it's difficult for them.
who was asked, "How do you know how to do this?" And I'd say names, but I can't remember the exact story, but and they would say, "Well, I just took away everything that wasn't that wasn't supposed to be there." And I think sometimes the magic might be in knowing who doesn't need to be included in the circle is
Hmm.
as much of the magic as who needs to be included in the circle.
Yes.
So, yeah,
And
just
not
a
everybody wants to be included. So
right.
bringing them in might feel like a waste of their time, or
Yeah. Yeah.
they might be uncomfortable if they're introverted and you're trying to include them in a conversation and they just want to kind of sit back, or they're cerebral, or thoughtful in their approach and don't want to just converse. That could create discomfort.
Yeah. No, right on. We are spending the season thinking about, before I move on to that, I almost forgot. As we think of the four needs of
Oh,
followers:
yeah. Our
hope,
four
stability,
needs.
compassion, and trust. Want to make sure they're included in this as well. Lots of opportunities for inclusion today. Where do you think in this construct? Of course, it can fit across all four, but some thoughts on where you think it fits in.
I like this idea of stability. I'm going to sprinkle that one in right now
Mm.
because as you were talking about the rings of engagement and communication that they can have by including
Yeah,
people, they create a lot of stability, or they can create a lot of stability because teams are communicating more effectively with each other, or individuals are communicating more effectively with each other. There's that sense of trust because they're inviting in the opinions and perspectives of others. Compassion because they
for sure.
appreciate the diversity of thought and perspective and the different roles people have. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
you
trying to
stole
think of
mine.
a. I did.
Yeah,
Was it
compassion is what
compassion?
compassion. Yeah, I think
Yes.
to be included at the right time for the right thing shows
Yes.
a lot of compassion, right? I think that's just an area. When we think about this, we're also spending some time thinking about this in the context of our two other role-based reports, Clifton Strengths for
Hmm.
sales, Clifton Strengths for managers. When we take these leaders and put them next to sales and maybe even physically these two reports together, what would you pull from that?
Yes. So this sales leader can ensure that the right stakeholders are represented in prospecting or client calls. So in the long run, having more than one stakeholder involved in that contract or deal means that if the person that they're talking to that's, on the client side leaves the company, they still have other stakeholders they've involved in that company to keep the relationship going. So I think that's something that they would probably just naturally have top of mind and also be ensuring that their team is considering. Whenever you're on that call, are you asking who else might be key to have in this conversation? Who else should
Yeah.
we maybe bring in this conversation that will be impacted by this or that would be interested in this? So that automatically came to mind for me with this one.
I think keeping that in mind with project rollouts, you think about a product that's
Yes.
sold and you're rolling that out, having a project manager or someone in the organization who's got includer high. This may be one of those where
Yes.
you intentionally like, okay, we're going to need some and hope maybe if they have includer communication. I'm living through one of those projects right now. And so it's very, very fresh, just kind of thinking, oh, we could probably have used some help in this area. We all have, in the group, we all have a lot of communication. I'm not sure it's necessarily pointed at this idea of making sure everybody's included. So
Mhm.
we got some areas in that to grow as well. What about leader and manager reports side by side? What could that look like?
Yeah, so they could be really adept at identifying key partnership opportunities between the direct reports. So their direct reports probably feel pretty supported when they're looking for support, mentorship, a partnership, whatever it might be, because that includer is going to know just the person for them to loop in or have
Mhm.
other people at least in mind to help support that individual.
Yeah. Yeah. I see this almost like in an onboarding, like
Hmm.
making sure someone new in the organization knows or is in all the right groups initially, right? To here, go talk with so and so, have a meeting with so and so, make sure this gets covered type deal. I see that being very beneficial in the onboarding process. Any other you think other things where
Yeah,
that may benefit in
I
that
could
cycle?
really see that. So certainly onboarding, and then maybe also when we start thinking about kind of that 3 to 5 year tenure for folks, and they're in that existential stage of what comes next for me? What do I want to do? What do I seek out? Um, this leader who manages people with Includer High might know who that person can go talk to think about next opportunities or to
Mm,
stretch their skill set. Hey, why don't you go connect with such and such? Because you might be really good for this, or you might, be interested in this type of responsibility. So I can see them really extending the branch to help them find other people to connect to as they think about maybe what's next for them within the
mm,
workforce.
mm.
So that internal agility,
Yeah.
if we think about that, the movement that you can have internally, if maybe you feel like, okay, am I being challenged enough in this role? Is there something more I might like, but it's in a different department? Includer knows so many different people all over the workforce that they could really help with that. So that
Yeah.
might be another opportunity for includers to lean
Mm.
in.
Mm. Love that. Love that. Love that thought. I'm going to ask you to wrap it here in just a second. But I love, as we think of the context of this in leadership, I think again it's another one of those key role, and they really all are in the leadership cycle. But as we talk about them, I just see so many great things that leaders who have high includer can add in teams need from that
Mhm.
standpoint. Jaclynn, final thoughts as we wrap up Includer today?
I'll tie in something you brought up earlier with just employee engagement and how folks are looking for that role clarity. They're looking to make sure they've got the materials they need. They're looking for recognition and make sure they're doing the right role that feeds into their strengths. So maybe I would challenge the includer to find that person that might be flying under the radar on their team. They might not even be a manager. You might be listening to this and you're an individual contributor with Includer High, but who do you know that might be a little bit less engaged in the workforce that you can draw into a conversation and just really spark some positive reinforcement and engagement to that person so they feel seen, heard, and valued.
Mm. Love that. I think with that, we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of all the resources we do have available. We want to include you in on this with all the resources. Head out to gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. Log in to Gallup Access from there. There's a couple different ways to do that, but you can do it from there. Once you're in Access, go to the menu, upper left-hand corner, and drop it down. Choose Resources. Put in the theme. Put Includer in. You'll see everything we have available in Gallup Access on that. And a great way to learn more about it. Stay up to date with all the webcasts. We want you to be here. I want to include you in this by following us, gallup.eventbrite.com. Create an account. I'll send you an email every time we post something new. Join us on any social platform by searching Clifton Strengths. And we want to thank you for listening today. Regardless of your platform, if you enjoyed it, share it, hit like, subscribe, all those things so you never miss an episode. I want to thank you for listening today. For those listening live, stay around for a little bit of a post show. We got to get Jaclynn off to an appointment. But with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.